my power! Soul Steel!
Castlevania has always been known for its high difficulty, demanding the player to be skilled or die and repeat fights and bosses over and over until they manage to break through. This difficulty is why games like Castlevania or the popular Dark Souls series are so beloved. The feeling of overcoming a difficult boss through pure skill. Well, need I say, here are 15 Castlevania boss fights so brutal that they'll destroy you in the best way possible. Galamoth, Symphony of the Night. Most players will breeze their way through the inverted castle until they stumble into the floating catacombs and meet Galamoth. Originally a goofy villain from Kid Dracula, here he is reimagined as a terrifying giant kaiju that practically fills the entire screen and is a tougher fight than the final boss Dracula. He is gargantuan, standing so tall that his head is pressing against the ceiling of the level, and he has a massive 12,000 HP, one of the highest in the entire game. Even if you walk into this room expecting a tough boss, you'll still be knocked flat with just how tough he is. He attacks with layered magical assaults that leave no safe space to hide in as he spams massive lightning bolts rain down from his staff, forcing you to run from the few safe pixels at his feet, while simultaneously launching black dark energy orbs that track you down. His massive sprite acts as a wall, trapping you in corners while he nukes you. Unless you notice specific cheese strats like equipping the barrel circlet to absorb his lightning or spamming the shield rod, Galamoth is a pure endurance test that is nigh unbeatable. The Forgotten One, Lament of Innocence. If you thought the vampires in Lament of Innocence were the scariest thing around, you clearly haven't found the unlocked jewel. Tucked away in the hidden prison of eternal torture, the Forgotten One is a secret boss that is complete body horror. He's a colossal, skinless humanoid monster that is literally rotting. He bleeds toxic sludge, shakes maggots off his body to attack you, and screams in a way that is actually creepy. Although Castlevania does do horror, they haven't done gore and body horror like this before. The Forgotten One feels like it should come from something like Resident Evil, not Castlevania. The fight itself is claustrophobic, endurance test, as he has a massive health pool spread across multiple grotesque phases. As you damage him, parts of his body fall off and he floods the arena with poisonous blood, forcing you to manage your spacing. The fight is literally a DPS race where you want to destroy him as quickly as possible before you succumb to the poisonous room. Dragon Zombie, Circle of the Moon. Circle of the Moon is already infamous for its stiff controls and difficulty, but the dragon zombies in the underground gallery is where it takes the cake. You walk into a cramped, claustrophobic room and are immediately sandwiched between two massive, rotting dragon heads coming into the combat plane from the background. They take up so much screen space that it feels like there's no real safe space to stand without getting touched. You're constantly jumping over massive head slams that shake the room and dodging poison breath while trying to whip at them whenever you get the opportunity. It felt like being trapped in a blender with these heads swinging everywhere, and you'd think things would get a little bit easier once you take out one of the dragons, free up space, you know? But no, when you finally manage to kill one of them, the surviving dragon reaches over and eats its dead brother's corpse to regain HP. Their slams now cause rocks to fall from the ceiling, turning the few safe zones you had into RNG kill boxes. You'll get crushed to death so many times here. Boss Gauntlet, Rondo of Blood. Rondo of Blood is often hailed as the best classic Vania for its branching paths and incredible soundtrack, but the final stretch leading up to Dracula is an absolute nightmare. This is a real test of your mastery of the stiff controls and committed jumps. As you enter the Dark Priest Shaft's chamber, this gauntlet features some of the most iconic classic monsters in pop culture. First you have the Darkwing Bat, forcing you to master the anti-air timing. Then comes Medusa, whose petrifying gaze can freeze you mid-jump, often leading to cheap hits. After that, you have to fight the Mummy and the Creature, who is basically Frankenstein's monster, who act as massive damage sponges, and they punish impatience with strict attack patterns and timed attack opportunities. Individually, these bosses are manageable, but it's the fact that you have to fight them back-to-back with 0 health refills in between that is a killer. You basically have to play perfectly for 10 minutes, and that's not the end of it. By the time the Ghost of Shaft actually manifests for the final duel, with his erratic orb attacks and teleportation spam, your health bar is likely in the red. Dracula multiple games. Bit of a controversial entry, this boss on this list as the ultimate boss of pretty much all Castlevania games. Yeah, of course, he's designed to be difficult. So let's talk about the most difficult iterations. In Castlevania Dracula X on the SNES and the Rondo of Blood climax, you're fighting him on tiny separated pillars suspended over a bottomless pit. The knockback from a single fireball sends you flying backward into the abyss, resulting in an instant death regardless of your health bar. In the Dracula X Chronicles remake, just when you think you've won, he morphs into a third grotesque demonic form that wasn't even in the original game, catching those who played the original completely off guard. In Order of Ecclesia, he stops playing games and starts using demonic Megiddo, a literal screen nuke that hits for 9,999 damage if you don't interrupt it in time. Even for all the other games in the franchise, Dracula is often the hardest beast to beat in almost all the games, sans secret bosses, as he is the final test of your mastery of the entire game. Death, Dawn of Sorrow. Death appears in almost every Castlevania game, usually serving as the skill check before you get to Dracula, but his appearance in Dawn of Sorrow is widely considered one of the most stressful encounters. At first glance, his pattern seems simple. He teleports, slashes, and summons sickles. But in practice, the execution demands almost unreal reaction speeds and precision. He'll float towards you, and you can't touch him without taking damage, so you try to keep your distance when he wrangles you into a corner. His quadruple slash attacks hit way too fast with way too little warning time, requiring you to identify the attack incoming, see the safe space, and get to it in a split second. The fight escalates even worse in his second phase, where he starts glowing red and pulls out a scythe as the screen is constantly filled with infinitely spawning sickles or mini scythes that act as heat-seeking missiles, meaning you've got to split your focus between them and Death himself, who loves to teleport directly into your hitbox for a massive slash. And to make it worse, you have to use your stylus to draw a seal to defeat him. If you fumble drawing the seal, which is so easy to do, he'll regenerate health and keep fighting. Death, Order of Ecclesia. Order of Ecclesia is widely regarded as the hardest of the Nintendo DS trilogy, the DS trilogy already being known for being very difficult as it is. So I suppose it makes perfect sense that the iteration of Death found here is an absolute nightmare. Although he still looks like the same Death we've fought many times before, in this game he's way more aggressive. In previous games, you could often damage tank your way through his floating sickles, but here, Shinoa is so fragile that getting hit by even a stray projectile takes a massive chunk of your HP, forcing you to constantly move and dodge. The fight is split into phases that test completely different skill sets. Initially, it's a dance of dodging his massive scythe wings, which have massive hitboxes. Then when he starts casting spells, the game basically turns into a bullet hell. I especially hate the spinning damage orbs. I can never get the timing right on when to slide through the tiny gap between the orbs, and all that combined with not one but two different heat-seeking mini-sights attacks makes this such a pain of a boss fight. Elegore, Order of Ecclesia. Death isn't the hardest boss in Order of Ecclesia, and Elegore is a boss that you often stumble upon unprepared. You walk into the arena expecting another duel with a knight or a demon, and instead, you're met with a colossal centaur beast so massive that only two of its legs fit on screen. This is probably the closest Castlevania has gotten to a Shadow of the Colossus boss fight, as he's a mountain of armor, and figuring out how to even hit him is half the battle. You have to systematically dismantle him, shattering the crystals on all four of his legs to bring him to his knees before you can climb onto his back to actually damage. Just navigating around him is a challenge, as you have to wait for him to jump in order to slide between his legs, then wait for him to jump again before you can finally get behind him to reach his back legs. Then when you get to his back, he'll try to buck you off while attacking you simultaneously. If you get knocked all the way to the ground, you have to restart the climb. Gravedorcus, Order of Ecclesia. We've been on a roll with Order of Ecclesia here, and you can see why many consider it one of the hardest games in the franchise, and Ecclesia makes that difficulty clear even early on, appearing surprisingly early in the Twilight Bridge area. This boss serves as an early reality check that establishes the glass cannon nature of Shanoa. You aren't playing as a tanky Belmont anymore, you're playing a fragile magic user, and this gargoyle stand dolphin proves that by taking you out in just 3 hits. Gravedorcus isn't just sitting there allowing you to wail on him, he actively haunts you, burrowing under the ground and erupting from the sand that you have to constantly dodge. You have to learn his tells, knowing when you to stop running and start casting, and exactly how high to jump when he rushes you. And then there are those spiky balls he spews out during his stationary, vulnerable phase. And because it's an early game, you don't really have any long-range sniper attacks, so you can only land a couple of hits before you have to run from them. Blackmore, Order of Ecclesia. This is the last Order of Ecclesia boss on this list, I promise. And by the time you reach Blackmore, after the Elegore fight, you think you're strong enough and have mastered the glyph system. Blackmore becomes the antithesis to the monsters you've been fighting so far. He's a vampire that controls a massive shadow monster projected onto the wall behind him. It's a creatively designed and animated boss, I'll say, and that makes this fight as fun as it is frustrating. The key to beating Blackmore is memorizing his attack patterns, as he has a couple of attacks he cycles through, and each attack has a specific way you have to survive them, all while spamming attacks against him. When the monster lunges at you or shoots his mouth laser, you gotta time your jump to get out of the way. When he brings down the meteors, you gotta find the one spot to safe and stand there. It's a rather simple and straightforward boss fight, but the difficulty comes in with getting the timing right and predicting when and where the save zones are. Julius Belmont, Aria of Sorrow. Throughout Aria of Sorrow, Julius is just the cool, mysterious amnesiac hanging around the castle giving you advice and whatnot. But when you finally reach the floating gardens and he regains his memories and his whip, and you're given a massive narrative lore drop that I don't want to mention because it'll massively spoil the story of the main character Soma Cruz, Julius doesn't fight like the other monsters on this list because he's a human and a Belmont on top of that. He dashes around and avoids strikes and counters like you're playing against another player. It's a cool mirror where you're on the receiving end of the vampire killer and you feel how overpowered that whip actually is. Then he enters the second phase where he uses the full classic Belmont arsenal of axes, holy water, and crosses, and he spams them with infinite ammo and 0 startup frames. He controls the horizontal space with his whip and the vertical space with his axes, leaving you very few windows to get a hit in. Soleyu Belmont, Castlevania 2, Belmont's Revenge. If you think Game Boy games are inferior quality to console versions, then you haven't seen what's in store in these games. You play as Christopher Belmont, and in a twist, the penultimate boss turns out to be your own son, Soleyu, who has been possessed by Dracula. The difficulty here comes with how Soleyu basically has the same moveset as you and will spam his attacks your way. The small confines of the Game Boy screen level size, along with the reach of Soleyu's whip and the flying swords he throws out, makes this a difficult test of patience. You can't approach Soleyu and you can't spam attacks either. You have to memorize his attack patterns and exploit them by timing your attacks to his movement opportunity so that he quite literally walks into your attack. You can only ever hit him once before either he backs away or you're forced to back away, leading to a tense and paced fight where you play defensively and attack only when the time is right. Shaft, Rondo of Blood. Hey, remember the boss gauntlet I talked about earlier on this list? Well, this is the boss fight immediately after that boss rush. So yeah, you're already starting off the fight against this dark sorcerer already on the back foot, low on health, and tired from the previous bosses. Shaft floats out of reach all over the arena, protected by 2 rotating elemental orbs that dictate his attack patterns. You have to memorize the color-coded signals, green for wind, red for fire, blue for lightning, while dodging a foe who flies to the other end of the room when you get too close. It's all the different variables you have to track simultaneously that make this boss especially difficult. You first need to be constantly aware of where Shaft is, because he's almost always slightly off-screen. Then you have to be aware of the location of the orbs, and be aware of their color, and then remember their attack patterns, like remember not to stand beneath the orbs when they're blue, and prepare to dodge and wave between them when they fly towards you when they're red. It's a mind bender of a boss fight. Menace, Dawn of Sorrow. You'll go into this boss fight expecting another Julius-like duel with another vampire hunter, only for the game to perform a bait and switch and reveal a horrifyingly grotesque amalgamation of every monster soul in the castle, stitched together into a kaiju-sized monster. The first phase, where the monster is crouched over you, trapping you while breathing fire at you and stabbing you with spikes, strangely reminded me of the flowy final boss from Undertale. Don't ask me why. Then, when you beat that phase and it stands up, you see just how gigantic he is. You'll only ever see his shin, glimpses of his thighs, his head, and his arm. The rest of him is just too big to be able to even look at. This is a long and tough battle that will take over 5 whole minutes to defeat, and while that doesn't sound like much, constantly dodging and fighting this monster for 5 minutes will feel like an hour. It's a worthy final boss that won't leave you disappointed when the game begins its ending sequence after you beat it. Dracula and Death, Portrait of Ruin. What's harder than Dracula and Death boss fights in a Castlevania game? Getting tag teamed by Dracula and Death at the same time, of course. Honestly, despite how it sounds, fighting both of them at the same time while you utilize Jonathan and Charlotte's tag mechanics to their fullest is very hype and makes an amazing boss cap on a very good game. Death and Dracula are designed to fight with synergy, as Dracula acts as a stationary turret, teleporting around and unleashing his classic Hellfire and Dark Inferno patterns to control the ground. Meanwhile, Death acts as a relentless pursuer, flying freely through the air to swipe at you, perform his quadruple slash attack, or fire off his bullshit sickles. You're constantly forced to split your focus, watching Dracula's cape for telegraphs, while keeping peripheral vision on Death's position. True Dracula, Portrait of Ruin. If you thought that the Dracula and Death tag team was the final matchup, well, think again. That was technically just phase 1. The two combined to form True Dracula, a bat demon that has an amazing design. I don't know how they animated his wings, if they're actually 3D animated and textured objects, or if they faked it with clever sprite work, but it creates one of the coolest and most memorable True Dracula fights I've ever seen. The best part is the wing grip attack, where his wings come out and it looks like he's trying to envelope the entire screen in his hands. And you have to use high DPS attacks between both Jonathan and Charlotte to keep them at bay. Then there are the scythe throws, which come at you hard and fast, and you gotta pay attention to the precise moments he throws so that you can see if it'll go high or low. It's a well-designed fight against a very well-designed monster. The best part about this list is that despite it being a list of literally the hardest bosses on the franchise, none of these bosses are considered cheap or unfair. They're all bosses you can go through with skill, preparation, and basic attack pattern countering. Very few other games can tout such great and consistent design, and it's wonderful that Castlevania stands tall and proud with its difficulty. There you have it, folks. 15 Castlevania boss fights so brutal they'll destroy you in the best way possible. What are your thoughts on these bosses? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, like, share, and subscribe. A subscription is the best way to be updated on all our latest content. This is John of Marvelous Gamers. I'll see you on the next video.